2025, the United States is set to execute multiple death row inmates, each convicted of horrific crimes. In this video, we take a deep dive into their stories, who they were, what they did, and how they ended up facing the ultimate punishment. Brad Keith Sigmon, execution date, March 7, 2025. Brad Keith Sigmon was 37 years old when he brutally murdered his ex-girlfriend's parents, David and Gladys Lark, in 2002. Sigmon had a history of violent behavior, and after his relationship ended, his rage reached a boiling point. On the night of the attack, he entered their South Carolina home and used a baseball bat to bludgeon them to death. The brutality of the crime shocked the community. Sigmon was quickly arrested, and his trial ended in a swift conviction. Now, at 67 years old, after decades of appeals, his execution is imminent. Wendell Grissom, execution date, March 20th, 2025. Wendell Grissom was convicted for the brutal murder of his girlfriend, Tina Grissom, in Oklahoma in 2002. The couple had a history of domestic disputes, but on the fateful night, a heated argument turned deadly. Investigators found that Grissom had beaten and strangled Tina, leaving her lifeless body in their home before fleeing. He was later captured and sentenced to death in 2004. After more than 2 decades on death row, his execution is now scheduled to proceed. David Leonard Wood, execution date, March 13, 2025. Known as the Desert Killer, David Leonard Wood is responsible for one of Texas's most terrifying killing sprees. Between 1986 and 1987, he preyed on young women, abducting and murdering at least 6 victims before burying their bodies in the desert outside El Paso. His crimes went undetected for years until investigators linked him to the disappearances through forensic evidence and survivor testimonies. In 1992, Wood was sentenced to death, but due to repeated appeals, his execution was delayed for over 30 years. Now 67, he will finally face justice. Christopher Sepulvado, execution date, March 17, 2025. In 1992, Christopher Sepulvado committed one of the most horrific child abuse murders in Louisiana's history. His 6-year-old stepson, Wesley Allen Mercer, was tortured over a 2-day period. Sepulvado first beat the boy, causing severe internal injuries. The next day, he held Wesley's head underwater in a scalding hot bath, causing fatal burns. The child suffered for hours before succumbing to his injuries. Prosecutors called it one of the most gruesome child abuse cases they had ever seen. Now 81, Sepulvado has spent over 3 decades on death row and is set to be executed by nitrogen hypoxia, a method newly introduced in Louisiana. Jessie Hoffman, execution date, March 18, 2025. Jessie Hoffman was only 19 years old in 1996 when he lured 28-year-old Mary Molly Elliott into his trap under the pretense of a ride home. What followed was a night of terror. Hoffman and an accomplice kidnapped, raped, and brutally murdered her. Molly's body was discovered days later, leading to Hoffman's arrest. His trial was swift, with overwhelming evidence leading to a death sentence. Hoffman has maintained that he was coerced by his accomplice, but multiple appeals failed to overturn his conviction. Now 46, his execution is finally set to proceed. Aaron Gunches, execution date, March 19, 2025. Aaron Gunches' crime in 2002 was one of calculated revenge. After a dispute involving his girlfriend's ex-husband, Ted Price, Gunches abducted Price, drove him into the Arizona desert, and shot him multiple times. Gunches fled the scene but was later arrested after another violent incident involving a police chase. Initially, he requested execution, waiving his appeals, but later changed his stance, fighting to stay alive. After years of legal battles, Arizona courts have set his execution for March 19, 2025, ending his decades-long stay on death row. Timothy Coleman, execution date, October 30th, 2025. Timothy Coleman was convicted of the brutal 1996 murders of Melinda Stevens and her 4-year-old son in Ohio. In a drug-related dispute, Coleman forced his way into Stevens's home, strangling her and suffocating the child. Evidence at the crime scene, including DNA and eyewitness accounts, led to his arrest and subsequent death sentence. Over the years, Coleman has insisted on his innocence, but multiple courts have upheld the conviction. Now 56, he will soon face execution. Kareem M. Jackson, execution date, December 10, 2025. Kareem M. Jackson was involved in a 1997 execution-style murder of 2 men in Columbus, Ohio. The killings stemmed from a drug-related robbery, where Jackson and an accomplice forced their victims to kneel before shooting them in the head. Prosecutors described the act as cold and calculated. His conviction was based on witness testimony, ballistics evidence, and Jackson's own admission to associates. Despite years of appeals, his sentence remains unchanged. Now 51, he is set to be executed by lethal injection. Matthew Johnson, execution date, May 20th, 2025. Matthew Johnson was sentenced to death for the 2003 murder of convenience store clerk Nancy Harris in Texas. During an attempted robbery, Johnson shot Harris in the head, execution style, before stealing money from the register. Surveillance footage and eyewitness accounts led to his arrest within days. Despite claiming he was under the influence of drugs at the time, the jury found him guilty of capital murder. Now 49, Johnson has exhausted all legal options and is set to be executed in May 2025. Moises Sandoval Mendoza. Execution date, April 23, 2025. In 2004, Moises Sandoval Mendoza was convicted of the gruesome murder of his estranged wife, Connie Lopez, in Texas. Driven by jealousy and anger over their failing marriage, Mendoza waited outside her home before ambushing her. He stabbed Connie multiple times in front of their 2 children before fleeing the scene. Witness testimonies and DNA evidence led to his swift conviction. Now 41, Mendoza is scheduled to die by lethal injection after years of unsuccessful appeals. Each of these cases is a stark reminder of the consequences of violent crime. While some argue that justice is being served, others question the morality of capital punishment. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime documentaries.